Hey, Scott from Aristocob.com here.
And Seth from SethMarkwood.com.
Together along with you, and we'd love you to introduce yourself down below, please. The three of us, we are Markwood Men's Breakfast Club. Please comment that you are the other third of Markwood Men's Breakfast Club, just to prove it to Boy that you actually exist. Welcome back once again, or for the first time. Hi, Boy. That fly loves your face.
I don't know what's going on here. It's probably because I'm so sweaty.
So we're continuing to enjoy Lane Ltd 7. I mean, what do you think of it? I say enjoy. I've been enjoying it. It's not 1Q.
No, it's not.
But it's similar.
It's similar. It's mellow. It's good.
This is the third bowl I've had.
Yeah, this is
sitting
3
here.
or 4 for me. I don't know. I smoke faster than you, so I'm burning through it more quickly. But
It's kind of an all-day smoke, I think.
I think so too. Yeah, I like it.
So one of the things that I've done since we saw each other prior to recording this video is I was up in Ohio. Went up there with my wife, and we hung out with some friends of ours. We had a quick little opportunity to get together and hang out, and a couple things happened that were interesting. The first one was Tim contacts a bed and breakfast that's in the area of where we wanted to be, and that was near Chillicothe, Ohio, and our plan was to go to an outdoor drama that has been playing there for over 30 years, and I was there probably 30 years ago. And it is the true story of the indigenous people there, the Shawnee Indians, and it's in the timeline prior to the expansion of the colonists into that part of the country, and it covers.
It's like Fern Gully. Have you seen Fern Gully?
No, I have not.
It's basically Fern Gully. Fern Gully is the story of Avatar, which is the story of Pocahontas. It's kind of like that, but slightly pre-Pocahontas.
There's no polka involved in this at all, though. The story, the main character.
That's why I said it's more like Fern Gully.
The main character and the name of this is Tecumseh. He was a chief of, prior to that, he was a brave and a warrior, and ultimately became the chief. And very interesting story, and it does cover that period of time where, like I say, the colonists were separating from England, and so they found a common enemy in the Americans, and were in the process of connecting up with the British to possibly at least hold back the westward expansion of America. And at the very least do that. And Tecumseh's plan was to unite all of the Indian nations into one nation, at least so that together they had a common voice to say, not only are you not moving further west, but you need to start honoring the treaties that you've signed. And as the story plays out, he puts his brother in charge of the tribe while he goes off to meet up with these other tribes to convince them that, look, together we're strong, and we need to put aside our problems and work together, and not necessarily go to war, but at least become a powerful enough group that we can say, no, you're not expanding here. And long story short, because you know that didn't work out, his brother was an idiot, and his brother actually was the one that undermined his plans and blew this whole thing. So our friends Tim and Kim, though they grew up in the same area that we grew up in, had never seen this drama, we wanted them to see it. And so Tim calls this bread and breakfast and arranges. Actually, he went online and arranged the.
You're calling it bread and breakfast?
I keep saying bread and breakfast because I've been off my low carb diet, and this trip really.
So it was a bread and.
It really threw me off because
bread and breakfast for you, huh?
I wasn't going to tell you about this part, but I will.
It's a Freudian slip.
It was a bread and breakfast. So Tim goes online to arrange for these 2 rooms, and he does this weeks in advance. And the week before we were due to go there, he gets a message, an automatic message from the website saying that his reservation has been canceled.
Whoop.
So he calls them and says, what's up with that? And they said, well, you, in your one reservation, you arranged for 2 rooms, and you can't do that on our website. You have to reserve just 1 room at a time. He said, well, then why is there a drop down to select the number of rooms you want? He says, okay, then I'd like to reserve 2 rooms. And I said, sorry, sir, we just have 1 room. That's why they canceled. They overbooked. So he put a little bit of pressure on him, and you need to know my buddy Tim, and you'll meet him someday, I'm sure. Tim is not the kind of guy who's going to get upset, but he put the right kind of pressure on them to where they revealed that they actually have a cabin that they could have us use. And they honored the price, and that cabin was amazing. It's a brand new place, very modern, really neat, totally secluded in the woods. And this is in an area of Ohio that is predominantly Amish. So surrounding us are these farms, almost no electric light. And in our cabin, it was all lit with LEDs and very little energy consumption in this cabin. It's very cool. And we then did Tecumseh. They enjoyed it. We come back and find out that very much right around the corner from us is a very famous place, a bakery called Miller's Bakery. And so the next morning we go to Miller's. I ate everything. I ate everything. It was ridiculous. I got a donut. No, I didn't eat my go-to would be the apple fritter. The apple fritters hadn't been made yet by that time of the day. They said after 10 o'clock they'll be available. We were going to be on the road back home. And but I ate a donut, and I ate a cherry turnover, and I had later in the day a cherry hand pie. You know, the little like Hostess cherry pies. They make those types of things fresh and all these different flavors. We got some kettle corn. It was ridiculous. Everything I ate was a carb with sugar.
Yeah. Those are the best kind of carbs.
Yeah.
Carbs with carbs.
The point of all this and what I wanted to share with you was on our way from Cincinnati, where Tim and Kim live, and we stayed a night with them, Tim made a point of directing us a way that I had never been, right along the Ohio River. And we stopped in a little town, and he wanted me to see something. It's like, all right, what are we stopping to see? You'll see. So we get there, and what it was Ulysses S. Grant's birthplace. This little teeny home that they kind of now take the credit for being the first mobile home, because after his death, some smart guy bought the home, put it on a trailer, or maybe even put it on a canal boat, took it up to Cleveland, and made a display there, and then took it to one of the state world fairs, and then eventually it was on display at the Ohio State Fair, and then eventually brought back to its original location. They're like 2-3 years away from the 150th anniversary.
Wow.
Of it wouldn't be of his birth, it would be of his death, I guess. And so it was really cool to see. They had a number of things there of the period, a lot of photographs, a lot of stories. And so as we're driving from there to our next location, and Jandy is driving because my leg was still hurting me, I'm pulling up Wikipedia and I'm reading articles. Now, why Tim thought of me? My mother's maiden name is Simpson. The S in Ulysses S. Grant is Simpson, and his mother actually was a Simpson. And so we are, while not in the direct lineage, I'm not a descendant of his, I am a descendant of one of his relatives. And so I'm reading Wikipedia and learning more and more about his story. And by the time we get to the next location, which was his childhood home, I wanted to see everything. And what we learned about him there was his father owned a tannery business, and he didn't like it. He didn't want to be involved in that business at all because it was messy and bloody, and apparently he really liked animals, horses in particular. And so his dad said, okay, if you don't want to work in the tannery, you got to work. And so set him up basically in somewhat of a livery business where he was using a wagon to carry people around to different locations, visitors of all sorts. He would haul things around as well. And he's 13 years old, 12 and 13 years old when he's running this business.
Wow.
And one of the neat and interesting stories that we heard about and that we got to see was word got around that the local doctor had paid a quarry nearby to cut a big sandstone slab for him that he wanted to have as his front stoops at his home. And they got this thing cut out of the ground only to realize they couldn't move it. And there had been teams of men and horses trying to figure this out. And this 13-year-old kid hears of their struggles, goes to check it out, and says to the doctor, "I can move it for you." So he goes there and digs 4 ramps into the ground alongside of the stone. And then he digs these tunnels underneath the stone. He drives his wagon down the 4 ramps, so each wheel's down its own ramp. That lowers the wagon down to a low level. And then he runs chains and ropes under and around. And while these men stood by, he raises this giant slab of stone out of the ground and delivers it to the doctor's house. 13-year-old kid. And they have since that house is long gone, they've moved that slab, and it's just out back of his childhood home. And apparently it was a big deal to get the thing moved because they had to bring in all kinds of equipment and stuff to do the job that this 13-year-old kid accomplished. And then we learned a bunch of other things about him. So then last week I met my friend's funeral in St. Louis. And after a period of involvement in the military, where he was in the Mexican-American Wars, he kind of got a distaste for war. You know, this is again a guy that didn't care for the tannery business. Imagine what war is like. However, he had shown that he was a heck of a strategist, and but he wanted to get out. So he got out. He ended up in California, and then ended up in St. Louis. And in St. Louis, he built a farm. And he built the farm on property that was adjacent to his in-laws' property. And one of the things that he found most distasteful was the fact that his father-in-law owned slaves. And he was not a fan of slavery. Although at one point, his father-in-law gave them a slave. And so for a short time, he was a slave owner, and then he freed that slave. And ultimately became a warrior again in the Civil War. And distinguished himself not only again as a great strategist, but ultimately when he was given the highest rank, it was Lieutenant General. Is that right, Lieutenant General? I'm probably wrong there. But it was a rank that had been retired because prior to that, the only person in the U.S. military who ever held that rank was George Washington.
Ah, nailed it.
So kind of like they retired his jersey,
right,
and then they gave that jersey to Grant. But he was noted several times in warfare to where he overtook an army, and when they surrendered to them, he would release them and let them go back home. He'd take their weapons. In some cases, they would take their horses, and if they would promise to not get back into the war, he would let them go. And ultimately, he did the same with Lee at the end of the war, and he basically issued a pardon for those guys. And after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, and by the way, Grant and his wife had been invited to sit in the theater at Ford's Theater with Lincoln, but after he accepted the invitation, his wife said, "I do not like Mary Lincoln. I am not going to sit in the booth with Mary Lincoln all night long. Wow. You get us out of this." So he backed out of the invitation, and he would have been sitting right there, right alongside Lincoln. But after Lincoln was assassinated, there was concern that there was a greater conspiracy. The war was over, and Lincoln's goal was to reunite the country. And there were a number of people that the Union was rounding up, and they wanted to try them for Lincoln's death. And among them was Lee. And Grant went to his defense and said, "You can't do this." I issued him a pardon. He was pardoned for his efforts against the Union, and him standing up for Lee is what saved Lee from maybe death.
Yeah,
really interesting, and I'm ashamed of myself for having not studied more about his life and his effect. And one of the things I'm seeing now, as I've studied a little bit in the last couple weeks, is how the tide has turned a little bit on people's opinion of Grant. Mostly, there had been a lot of talk about how he was a drunkard,
Alcoholic.
and well, that's the point.
I heard that.
The point is, he was an alcoholic. He had a disease that he fought, and that apparently the people in his time and after his time that were trying to besmirch him were his political opponents. And people that had another view and another vision for the country, and they're the ones who spread the stories, some of which were true, but most of that didn't affect his decision making and his governance. So really an interesting guy.
CEO of my company just within the last 2 months was telling me he's been reading a book on Grant. And so I'll find out what it is, and because he was saying I'd be really interested in it, not knowing the relation side of it, but. He was talking about it, and one of the things he said is that Grant's, while people talk about the drunkenness as a downfall, that Grant's probably biggest downfall was being too trusting. And so there were people, especially as president, who took big time advantage of him. And then it sounds like that, jives with the idea of him letting people go, which I understand both sides of that line of thinking. In the Civil War, the war is because of quintessential differing viewpoints. But at the end of the day, if his goal, same as Lincoln's, is bringing the country back together, then what benefit is there to execute people that are members of your team at the end of the day?
Yeah. Well, that's just it. You don't have a union if you don't unite.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm in St. Louis, and I'm starting to have deja vu as I'm driving around. I had an hour before I was supposed to be at the funeral, and I suddenly realized I think I'm close to Grant's farm. And I have this weird, I think I'm part homing pigeon. I don't remember street names, but somehow or another landmarks just get imprinted in my brain. And so I pull up Waze and I search Grant's farm. I'm 0.4 miles from
You should
Grant's
see what
farm.
happens when you put a magnet to his head, though.
It's crazy. I started going in circles. So I drive there, and I'm shooting a few pictures and things. But my favorite thing, two interesting facts about Grant's farm. The first one, it is the only remaining structure that was hand-built by a U.S. president.
Wow.
Now, you could argue that Carter has built a lot of homes for Habitat for Humanity, but he built this himself. He built the whole home, and that home still remains. But to me, the most interesting thing, when my buddy Briscoe took me there for the first time, was we're standing there and they have this, it looks like a wrought iron fence that's kind of guarding from the street. And Briscoe says, by the way, did you notice the fence? Yeah, it's kind of cool. He goes, yeah, take a closer look at the fence. I take a closer look at the fence, and it's interesting because the iron rods don't go all the way from the ground up 8 feet. They go up a couple feet, and then there's this horizontal line, and then a second row that's slightly offset continues on up. And each one of those is hexagonal and slightly tapered. And so, okay, I give, what am I looking at? He goes, those are
barrels.
Civil War rifle barrels. They built the fence with
cool.
rifle barrels. Yeah, really cool. I don't know when they did that and who did that, but it's kind of a neat touch to that historic landmark. So anyway, kind of a fun little walk down family history, and it makes me want to know more about all of this. And I know living in the South now, there's all kinds of opinions about things. And I'm not a historian, and I'm like a maker in my knowledge.
Yeah.
I'm interested in enough things that I find interesting, and then I move on. And somebody is going to leave a comment because they know a lot more about this, and they're going to correct me. That's okay. I like to learn. But understand that our opinions are all structured based on, I read this author and this theologian and this whatever, this way of thought. And maybe I'm learning something that was written by the winners, and they're writing a different point of view. Or I'm reading things from the losers, and they have a different point of view. And sometimes we don't learn the whole story. And
yeah, we
certainly won't hear the whole story here.
oftentimes it's somewhere in the middle, right? The truth often lies somewhere in the middle. Well, that's cool.
Yeah. We need to go out there sometime.
Okay.
I'd love my grandkids to retrace the steps that we just took, because that whole trip from those 2 locations for Grant, and it would be neat for them to see it without knowing who this kid is. And at each stage, learning about this kid and how he was different and what he did to distinguish himself, and the fact that he was apparently quite the horseman. The lady that was running the second house was telling us...
By horseman, you mean a man who likes horses.
Partially horse.
So a centaur. Just call it what it is. I think that's PC. It's fine.
The lady who was giving us a tour of the house grew up in the town, and she said that as a kid she heard that this was that house, but it was a private residence, so she hadn't been in it. But as she now has taken on this role giving tours and has learned more and more about it, she said, I grew up owning horses, and all of my friends had horses, and we rode our horses down creeks and along certain trails, and we went to town certain ways. And she since learned those were all the ways that young Ulysses used to take his horses. And that kind of gave her a neat connection to that.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't know if we have a question of the week. Can you come up with a question out of all that for them to answer?
No.
I mean, they've already typed that they're a third of Markwood Men's Breakfast Club.
Yeah, that's probably enough.
Okay.
Are you sure?
It depends on whether we're recording or not.
Well, it's always iffy around here. So far, we've had mixed success.
That's correct. But some great conversations.
And you could ask, type in the comment, have we been recording or not?
All right, that's it for this one. You guys make it a great week.
See ya.